Hi everybody, we are very happy to have Lynne Kasey here with us today. She is an artist extraordinaire, and one thing she does is photo transfer. So she's been gracious enough to come in here and show us her process today. I'm going to let her take it away. Thanks for being here, Lynne.
Thank you. What I'm going to show you today is something that you can do with your photographs other than just mat and frame them. It makes it a little personal. They turn out just a little bit different every time. You can transfer onto metal, tile, wood, even birch. So what I'm going to show you today is how to do the metal, because it has one additional step that where you would have to get something other than Mod Podge or matte medium. I prefer matte medium, but Mod Podge works just as well for a lot of these things, and you can find those at Walmart, Meijer, any store. The matte medium I get at Hobby Lobby, or Michael's, wherever you prefer to do that. So I have prepared one metal for you to see, and I have other examples of what you can do. This is a larger metal that you can transfer your photograph onto. It gives it a little bit of a vintage look. I finished it on the back with scrap paper, which kind of finishes it. And once you finish it, it's actually waterproof on the front. You can also put it on ceramic tiles where you can make coasters of your family, your favorite photographs, whatever images you like. But it's a fun way to do things instead of just matting and framing. I also have another. I don't have much luck with glass, so I'll just tell you that right now, but with acrylics. So this is plexiglass. You can transfer onto that and hang it in the window. They're very lightweight and they work really, really well. You could get these cut for you at Sturgis Glass. So let's begin. So this is what I'm going to start with today. This is a piece of metal that I picked up at Cotton Hardware. It cost me 59 cents. So this is in the plumbing department. I think it's a little bit of flashing, but it's aluminum. It's quite flexible. So I have prepared this by scrubbing it with, not steel wool, but anything. You could even use a fine grit sandpaper, because you want to get this a little bit rough so you have something that grabs onto your image. So what you need to start with is an image printed on plain computer paper, but it has to be done on a printer with a toner. Inkjet printer will not work. So if you don't have one of these at home or access to work, you can go to your local printer and ask them to do this, but it needs to be on the cheapest computer paper that you can get. You don't want anything glossy and shiny, and no photo paper. The other thing that you have to remember when you're going to do this process is when you have it printed, you need to have it printed mirror image, because you're going to lay this down on top of your substrate or your surface that you're transferring onto. And so you need it flipped so that when this comes off, it's facing the right way, especially if you have any sort of writing on it. So this is my signature, my name down here at the bottom. So as you can see, it's flipped. So that's very important. So now once I've prepared this metal, this is the only other thing that I need for metal. Everything else you can use just, again, like I said, the Mod Podge or the matte medium. This I got online from Jo Sonia's, and she sells a lot of, I don't know if any of you remember toll painting, but she sells a lot of acrylic paints, but this is a solution that I get there. So the first thing I'm going to do, and this helps this adhere to the metal, because metal is, well, non-porous. So you put just a little bit onto your metal and spread it out. It dries fairly quickly. It doesn't have a terrible smell to it, so it's okay to use in a little smaller space. So as you can see, it's stripped a little bit of maybe oil off of here. and you let that dry. What I'm working on is freezer paper and tape. It works great for this. I can use it over and over again. I can keep it down. It doesn't get wet and icky. So it's a really nice, inexpensive way to make a workspace in your kitchen or wherever you might like it. So we'll let that dry. So now I'm going to use paper plate. Be careful not to use too much of this or put too much down, because you'll use not as much as you think you might need. So you can always add to, and you kind of hate to throw that away. So you're going to put this, whether it's Mod Podge or your matte medium, on both surfaces. I usually start with the metal first. And you want to do a thin coating. You don't want it really, really thick. What happens if you get it too thick underneath there, it leaves pockets of basically glue, is what this is, a particular kind of glue. And if you have those down there, when you try to take this paper off, you'll end up with like a spot of glue, and your image will not adhere to that. So you have to be a little careful about that. Now this paper, once it's been printed on, sometimes is a little slick. So you have to add a little more onto this than you would the metal surface. But still get it as thin as you can, and pretty good coverage. So you just don't want any. So as you can see, I really didn't use all that much of this matte medium. So I'd be okay with that if I was going to do several at a time. So you line this up onto your surface. This is cut just a little short, but that's okay. I kind of like to do stuff with these edges when I'm done. So you flatten that out. It appears to be flat, but here's another item that's very handy. You can use a credit card to do this as well, but I've found this squeegee, and again, I got this at Michael's or Hobby Lobby. A credit card has a hard edge on it, and sometimes I have a tendency to maybe scrape into the paper before I'm ready. So you want to take this and press across, and now you can see that I've gotten some of that ink, or that, I'm sorry, the matte medium out, and wipe that off. So see, some of the color has come off a little bit, but you'll see that it really doesn't matter. The one thing I would suggest when you're picking an image, see, a lot comes out of there, is to pick something that's colorful. Black and white works okay if you don't have a lot of white, but if you have a lot of white space in your photograph, there's nothing to adhere to what you're transferring onto. So you're better to not have a lot of white space in your photo. But we'll take some time for this to dry. So I continue to scrape along there until I no longer get things coming out from underneath, or that glue coming out from underneath. So that seems to be pretty good. Now the metal, it takes a lot longer to dry, and it's difficult for me even to wait. But it's best to leave this set overnight if you can, or at least for a few hours before you try to remove this paper. So I prepared one last night, although the photo's a little bit different, you'll see. So here it is when it's dry. It's flexible, and it's just plain paper. So our next step, and this takes a little bit of patience sometimes. I'll get this out of the way. take a paper towel in a bowl of water. I wet the paper towel, squeeze most of that water out. So then you just take that wet paper towel and rub it over your surface. You want to try not to get it too wet, because if it's too wet and you start rubbing this paper off, you run the risk of pulling some of the paper away from the metal as well. So not soaking wet. So you want to use just a light pressure. It's something that you'll learn if you try this and you do it several times, and don't get too frustrated. But don't come down like this to scoot the paper off. Try to keep your fingers flat so that you don't, say, get your nail underneath there. And then you gently start to remove the paper. So from now, all of this, other than this Joe Sonia's, all of this will, anything you transfer onto wood, I transfer onto birch bark, I've even done leather, the metal. You can transfer onto watercolor paper, which gives it just kind of a different, interesting look about it. And if you were to do a black and white print and do it on the watercolor paper, if you're at all arty, you can paint over that and add color. So we're going to get this top layer off. It comes off a little easier. This is on there really well, which is nice. I know there are photo printing places where you can have your images printed onto metal, and they're beautiful. And you don't get, there's really no vintage look about it. Sometimes little pieces of color will come off of this, and I like that because it gives it sort of an old vintage look. But it's terribly expensive to send these things out to have them printed. So this is, like I said, 56 cents at any hardware store. And that you can get galvanized steel ones as well, but they have a pattern underneath them that will show through, which for me was undesirable. They used to be much better, but you can go to, I've done it, Hobby Lobby a lot of times has galvanized steel pieces in their housewares department, and you can do the same process on those. I've done, gosh, like bins where I've transferred photos onto them, and they're kind of fun because you can, once you seal this, it's waterproof, and so you could use it outside as a planter. I mean, you're only limited to what you can imagine, and you start this and you'll be, well, my husband says, I'm like a junkie, a transfer junkie, because once I started doing this, I kind of looked at things differently. So you can see now that I'm starting to get my image to show up. The one thing that's going to be time consuming about this, once this top layer comes off, and as you can see, as I wet it a little bit more, especially in this area, you can start to see it really start to show through. But once that dries, you have a lot of little tiny paper fibers that you have to keep working to remove. does come a point in time when you can run this, when you get so much of it off, under the tap, like turn your water on really slow, and it will help get that final layer of paper fiber off of there. So I feel it's a little wet. And I'm not pressing very hard. So that's better. That's a little drier, and so I got a little better contact there to get those fibers off. And you can't really see it, but you can feel it. Once you try this, you can feel those fibers and where they need to come off. As you can see, I'm using the flat of my hand in here. This guy's on there really good. So this is part of the reason that you give it a few hours to dry, because it really adheres quite well. So in those areas where you have details that matter, say if you're doing a photograph of one of your kids or grandkids, when you get into those areas that are really important, that you don't take a little piece off, those are the areas that you want to concentrate on being very, very careful and just using a really light touch. Because like here on his face, I don't want to lose. He's got kind of an interesting little smile. I think dragonflies always look like they're smiling. So I can see where a little bit of that metal's starting to come through there, which for me is fine. It really gives it a certain depth. So I don't know if you can see that, where some of the metal is sort of showing through up here at the top. So that'd be an area that I'll probably back off of for a while and move on to another one, because you don't want a lot of it to come off. But again, I kind of like that sort of vintage look. And when you start to get that, you might want to try to wet it just a little bit more so that you aren't rubbing not so much friction on the metal. But it's amazing to me how the colors stay. The original picture looks a little, you might feel that it looks a little not as saturated, the colors as saturated as you would like them when you first get it, but I've never been disappointed, because once you start this, those colors seem to brighten up. So you can kind of see where I still have a lot of paper left over here, and especially on the metal, it seems to take a little bit longer to get it off. But it's a great thing, because you can get up and walk away from it and it doesn't hurt, and you just can come back to it if you have to go cook dinner or do something with the kids, or you've got someplace to go. It isn't going to hurt to leave it and come back and re-wet it. with a paper towel and just go back at it again. Because that is the one frustrating thing for people, is trying to get all of this paper off. So this gives you a pretty good idea. Let me get his wings. Feel that paper is almost completely off of his face, so I can leave that alone. And come out here to the details in the wings. So this is a bit of what you're going to get with that. Now I'll show you, and it looks, I'm guessing I've got a line here and one here. My guess is what I probably did when I used this was a little heavy on one side. It's not going to matter to me. Now I've switched to do a little thing. We'll set the metal aside, and I'd like to show you what happens when you transfer onto wood, just so when you pick your substrate that you understand what you may get. So this is one I just put on here today, and it's wood, and you don't have to wait as long before you try to take the, or not try, start to take the paper off. So this is a picture of my grandson. Loves the water. And this does come off quicker than the metal, a little bit. But if you have, say, any kind of a lightness, so his skin tone, you're going to be able to see, you're going to be able to see the wood grain. On his face. For me, that's fine, but when you are picking something and you're picking your image, you might want to be sure where you place it, that, say, one of these grains does not run directly through an eye that's looking at you or an important part of your photograph. And again, see how my hand is flat. That is really the best way to do that. So I think you can see what we're starting to get here. So once all of this paper is off, buy a Krylon clear spray. If you like glossy, you can buy the glossy. I prefer a matte spray. And once you have all of this paper off, then you spray, I usually do 3-4 coats. And if you're going to use a tile, a ceramic tile, you can make coasters. You have to let it cure a little bit, what you spray on there, for a couple of weeks before you try to do it, or it becomes kind of tacky. So again, here's what we have. So as you can see, when I wet this, it hides some of those papers. I don't have to take all of it off. So you can see what you'll end up with. And it makes a great gift, Christmas gift, grandparents. You can use them as a coaster. You can set it in an easel, so it just takes up a little bit of space. Or you can get a bigger piece of wood and hang it on the wall.
Thanks for stopping by today. I hope you enjoyed Lynne's demonstration as much as I did, and I think I'd like to try that at home. It looks like you can do that with a minimal of materials. So hopefully you enjoyed it. Make sure to keep an eye on our Facebook page. We'll be bringing a lot more fun, interesting programming to you in the coming weeks and months. And also make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We'll see you there. Thanks again.